It's a jarring sight. Piles of trash are strewn about the picturesque landscape, with plastic bags tangled on sagebrush and candy bar wrappers blowing across the dirt road in front of you. The wooden fence that marked the entrance to this area has been ripped apart, and pieces of the wood are now lying on the ground as the charred remains of someone's illegal bonfire. It's a frustrating but realistic view at many of Utah's wildlife management areas during recent years, as members of the public have overcrowded and misused some important areas across Utah, areas that are specifically set aside for wildlife and wildlife-related activities. This is Wild, a Utah Division of Wildlife Resources podcast. I'm your host, Faith Heaton-Jolly, and this is episode 22, Wildlife Management Areas. Welcome back to Wild, everybody. I'm here in studio today with two of our DWR employees, and I'm really glad that they made the trek here to Salt Lake today. They don't feel very excited to be here, I don't think, but they're good sports. And we have a really important topic today, so I'm excited about our discussion that's coming up. So I have here with me Chelsea Duke. She is the DWR's Wildlife Lands Coordinator here in our Salt Lake office. And then I also have Mark Farmer. He is the Central Region Habitat Program Manager based out of our Springville office. Thanks for coming on today, you guys.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm going to have you guys kind of explain how long you've worked for the division and just kind of what you do. Because all of the titles here are very fancy and very long, but they don't paint a very good picture sometimes of what you actually do day to day.
Yeah, well, my job title, Wildlife Lands Coordinator, that's pretty much all I do. I work with lands. I've been with the division for 2.5 years, and my job is basically managing all of the real property aspects of the division-owned land. So I do a lot of buying and selling of our land. I put out permits for special uses of the property. I deal with easements for like utility companies and things like that. And then I manage agreements and contracts that have to do with land.
Okay, awesome. And I'm very excited, again, like I said, to talk about this topic because a lot of people have no idea that the DWR owns or manages land. So that's kind of what we're going to dive into. Yeah, and then Mark, kind of tell us a little about what you do.
Nice to be here, Faith. Thanks for having me. So I started work for the division back in 1991 as a seasonal when I was attending Brigham Young University. And I worked as a seasonal for a while and then became full-time on the Utah Big Game Range Trend Project, which is a vegetation or habitat monitoring program statewide. I did that for about 12 years, which was a blast. Enjoyed it very much. I started working in Springville in 2004, and I've been there ever since. First as a habitat restoration biologist, and now as a habitat program manager. So the restoration biologist job's a lot funner. Once you become a manager, then you got all the administrative stuff you got to worry about, which is not as much fun.
Yeah, babysit all the employees and
lots of meetings, lots of budgets and all that stuff.
But I will say the Springville office is gorgeous, so that's a bonus.
Finally, it was many years of old building, but now it's finally a nice office.
It's good to have both of you guys. And so today we're going to be talking about WMAs, which is an acronym for our wildlife management areas and also our waterfowl management areas. Confusing that it's the same acronym, but it can mean two different things. So let's kind of dive into, first off, what exactly is a waterfowl/wildlife management area?
Basically, we classify a WMA, like you said, waterfowl or wildlife, respectively, based on pieces of property that we have purchased or acquired over the years, big or small, that we own and manage for the division for wildlife, habitat, and wildlife recreational purposes. So across the state, we have 146 WMAs. That's a little over 500,000 acres all across the state. And if you turn that into square miles, it's about 780 square miles.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I'm glad that you did turn it to square miles because I'm like, I don't know what an acre, how big that is, So, yeah, that's awesome. And you'd kind of talked about it's for some recreational use. So what exactly is the purpose of these lands?
It totally depends on what the property was purchased for. There's lots of different properties purchased for different reasons. In my region, a lot of our properties are purchased to protect and maintain winter range for big game.
Okay.
Big game or winter range in my region is kind of limiting because of urban expansion and urban expansion moving up in the foothills. So the winter ranges for wildlife are pretty important to keep them alive and keep them fed during the winter months when they're down the lowest elevations they come.
Gotcha. So it's kind of where they come when it's really snowy and they're trying to look for feed
Right,
and
they're
grass.
trying to maintain their body condition as best they can. So we're trying to manage the sagebrush habitats, those lands there right at the bottom of the foothills, basically. We do have some WMAs there for waterfowl, and there's been some lands purchased for sportsman access. That's pretty common. So it depends on what the land was purchased for.
Yeah, I will say every WMA is very unique in the purpose that we purchase the property, how it falls on the landscape, where it is in relation to other maybe public land, or, if it's an area that a lot of private land is held, we try to preserve as much public land as we can to keep that habitat. Like Mark said, we have a lot of wintering habitat for a variety of species all over the state, and then wetland habitat for waterfowl, sportsman access. That's another big reason we purchase property and manage WMAs.
And when you say sportsman access, kind of explain what that means. Like, what is that exactly?
Well, for example, I've got 7 sportsman access points around Utah Lake that I manage. They're basically parking lots or small properties right on the lake shore, basically, for people to get to the lake, put their little boats in the water, go duck hunting or whatever to access the lake.
Gotcha. So it just kind of provides an area that they can get to where they're wanting to hunt or fish or whatever.
Right.
You mentioned parking lots. Does that include like boat ramps and docks and things like that as well?
For me, it's mostly just primitive boat ramps.
Okay.
Occasionally, or just a place to get to the lake. So, Central Region has the most WMAs for the regions.
Okay.
We have 42.
Oh, wow.
And they go average in size from 80 acres as the smallest to almost 20 or 12,400 acres is one of the biggest. Average size is about 2,300 acres. We also have 5 conservation easements. Those are lands that are purchased that we manage, but we don't own. We basically bought the development rights so we can maintain those for wildlife habitat. So we got all that land. It's about 110,000, almost 111,000 acres. I've only got 3 biologists and 2 maintenance guys to manage everything.
Oh, wow.
So it's a huge job.
It's a big responsibility, yeah.
Very
Job
big.
security, let me tell you.
Right, right. So, yeah, just to kind of clarify, so obviously set aside kind of as a place for wildlife to utilize, and so people can't build houses and stuff, take away their feed and stuff during the winter, different times of year, but also provides a good spot for hunters, anglers, other people to kind of come out and enjoy the wildlife, hunt, fish, those types of things. Expanding on that, so talk about basically how they're different from other public lands, because I think that's kind of a big misconception is people hear, oh, well, it's state owned, so that means I can just go do whatever I want. It's public access. So kind of explain how it's different, I guess, and some of the things that you can't really do there.
This is a question we get all the time. Why are WMAs and division-owned property so different than other public lands? I'll say WMAs aren't owned and operated for multiple use. I think that's the biggest thing that separates them. These lands aren't purchased or managed the same way that BLM manages land, Parks and Recreation, or other public lands. They're specific for wildlife and wildlife-related recreation.
So you can't just pull your huge camper trailer up and just park and like take over the whole area as like a public campground type of thing. I guess, do we have public campgrounds on any of the WMAs?
Well, we have quite a bit of dispersed camping people do on the WMAs. Most WMAs allow camping.
Okay.
I know that's a big problem in some of the northern region where they have too much camping. And we get quite a bit in some areas of the central region, especially around deer hunt. Problem is Forest Service campgrounds cost money. They can come down the mountain and camp on a WMA for nothing.
Because we don't have like a fee station.
No.
We don't have people there 24/7. Yeah.
No, it's more
Stuff.
primitive, dispersed camping, but it can be a problem. But that's the biggest thing we need people to know is these aren't, it's not the Forest Service. It's not multiple use. We manage for a single use, and that's wildlife protection, habitat protection. And people need to realize that and understand the difference.
Sure. So we don't want people taking their dirt bikes and making new trails through where the deer and elk are coming to spend the winter or whatever type of thing.
Exactly.
Okay. And kind of go into, so I know, and it's kind of been in the news, we've done some publicity about it, but we actually did have to close some parts of some of these wildlife management areas because, like you said, it was just getting out of control. And talk about some of those issues that we were seeing with some of these overcrowding with the camping.
Well, the biggest problem we have is recreation use, because our Timpanogos Wildlife Management Area is right on the edge of Linden and Orem. So we get lots of people trail running, mountain biking, hiking, horseback riding, all kinds of things like that. Every weekend there's dozens of people up there, lots of people. So a trail system was created by users without any input from the division. We didn't know we had a trail system until we started seeing on the internet trails that were named by users. Mountain bikes pretty much were pretty largely responsible for a lot of those trails. They'll basically ride a game trail and it becomes a bike trail after a while.
I see.
So we had to start from scratch, get together with user groups, and we worked with the Utah Valley Trails Alliance, which is a group of other agencies and user groups that kind of get together to help manage trails in the Utah Valley. And we kind of came up with a trail system we could both live with, try to minimize the amount of trails. We had 55 miles of user-created trails.
Oh, wow.
Mostly user-created. We had Great Western Trail and the Bonneville Shoreline Trail were the only approved trails.
It just in this one area.
That happened in like 10 to 15 years of just people using it.
Yeah.
So we've whittled that down to 27 miles of approved trails, and we've got them signed. And the only way you can, we're not park rangers, so we can't really enforce the rules up there unless we have rangers riding the trails and make sure people are, obeying the rules. Because we don't have that, we've got to get the public to help us, the user groups to help us manage the property, keep the trails in good condition, enforce the rules.
Sure.
Otherwise, there's no way we could do it. It'd be the Wild West.
Sure.
Like it was before.
Right. And kind of talk about why are some of these hiking, biking, whatever types of trails, why are they bad? Is it mainly the erosion that can cause, that they cause?
That's some of it. But the main thing is it's just people disturbing wildlife that are maybe using the property.
Gotcha.
So,
that it's meant for.
Right. Why it was purchased.
Gotcha.
This particular property was purchased mostly for winter range, so we try to keep that closed during the winter closure period, which is the first of December through the end of April. If we can minimize, use on those times, that's the critical time.
Gotcha. And those are the times of year where we don't want anybody on these properties at all.
If we could keep them off, mainly it's motorized vehicles for us because we can't really keep people from walking or horseback riding. That's not as big of a problem as motorized vehicles.
Gotcha. Just anything that's going to really startle deer.
Yeah, it's just
and
a
elk
disturbance issue. And mountain bikes, they don't see them, the deer they're disturbing because they're long gone before they get there, but they can disturb wildlife quite a distance from where they're riding.
Gotcha.
And that's the problem with having DWR owned land so close to the cities. People want to get out and go adventure and recreate, but they see all public land as their own. Their right to recreate in any way that they choose, and that's just not the intention of these properties.
And I feel like I've seen quite a few of our wildlife management areas, waterfowl management areas. They all have signs, right, that kind of explain what they're for, or at least the name, and so people should kind of recognize that this isn't just another public trail or camping spot or whatever, right?
I think we've determined the signs don't really convey what we want to convey.
People just don't read.
Or they just, they don't really look at signs very well and understand what they mean. We have kiosks, a lot of our entrances, and we put information on those kiosks. But you actually have to read kiosks. Most people just glance at them as they ride by.
Sure.
And really don't read the information unless they're really bored and they want to go walk over and read the information off the kiosk. But
sure.
We try. Interesting thing is we had the range fire that started in October on the Timpanogos WMA.
Of last year.
And it burned 80% of the property.
Man.
And it burned all our trail signs that we'd put up to keep people on the right trails.
Yeah.
So one of the silver linings to that is we had to close the WMA to trail users. Suddenly people understood this is different than the Forest Service because they're closing the trails.
Right.
We had to close the trails because it was wide open, and we would have had probably a lot of new trails created if we hadn't closed it. So we got the user groups together to help us do the trail maintenance and put new signs up and work with us to get that ready to open again. We've got part of it open now, and we're almost ready to open the other half. And that's been kind of a silver lining to get people to understand what wildlife management areas are. And it's a privilege for them to be able to use it in the way, we can all use it responsibly.
Right. So that it's not harming the wildlife that it's actually intended for. And you guys had to close part of it too because you were reseeding to provide the feed for the elk and deer.
There was a couple of reasons. The trail creation was one. The other reason was because we did seed it, and we wanted that seed to not be disturbed while it was growing.
Gotcha. And I think kind of going back to, like you mentioned, some of those issues in your region and some of the issues we've seen with camping in the northern region, I just thought it was wild that we ended up having to close some of those areas. And some of the issues they said were insane. Like there was vandalism. People were tearing down the fences to build fires, and it's not established fire pits. Like we've talked, it's not an established campground. It's all primitive for hunters, anglers, people that are using it for wildlife recreation. And there was drug use. They had a bunch of cop calls up there, and it was crazy. So I'm like, yeah, that's definitely not wildlife friendly. And so people need to realize this isn't just your backyard free party area. This has a specific purpose like we've been talking about.
Exactly. And when we don't have the law enforcement numbers to be up monitoring like the Forest Service or BLM has, you have to rely on the public to do the right thing, to read the signs, to understand why this property was purchased and what is the purpose, because it's a lot of self-regulation.
Sure. And that's kind of why we're trying to do some of these educational efforts like this podcast and things, is to let people know how it is different. And kind of going more into that, how are these areas funded? Basically, how are they purchased? Where does that funding come from?
Yeah, so one of our biggest funding sources comes from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program. I'm going to call that WSFR because that's a mouthful. But that is two different things that passed in 1937 and then again in 1950. And that is the excise tax on hunting and angling items. So when you go to the store and you purchase ammo for your gun, or you go to the store and you're purchasing rods and reels and all of that, that money that you're spending gets taxed. And that goes to the federal government. And then the government, through a complicated formula, they distribute that out to the states. And so this program, in large part, is how we use this money to acquire, manage, and improve this habitat for wildlife and wildlife recreators. So when you go and use that property, you are stepping onto property that you probably helped purchase.
If you purchase stuff for hunting and angling and stuff like that.
If you're that intended audience.
Gotcha. Okay. And I think that's important to note, because sometimes it might seem like we're giving kind of favoritism to hunters and anglers to access some of these areas and do things, but that's why is they're kind of the ones that are paying for it, right? And they're helping to fund that.
Yeah, and our second largest money maker is license sales. When you purchase a fishing license and you purchase a hunting license, that money also helps to acquire, manage, and improve this land.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's not just people's regular tax dollars. They can't just say, "Oh, I'm a state citizen and this is state land, so I get to do whatever I want here." Okay.
Very, very specific.
Okay, interesting.
So that funding from the Habitat Council, it gets some of that money from the restricted fund, I guess, from state money. We get all of our money to manage the WMAs in my region, all the regions basically. Pays for all our operating costs. So the Central Region spends about just under $120,000 a year to manage those 42 WMAs and access points and stuff. That's what we have, and that's barely enough. But that's where it comes from. It comes from sportsmen, and they're the ones that are flipping the bill or paying for it. And thank goodness we have that funding source available.
So it's not only helping purchase the actual properties, but then it's also helping pay for the management, like you said, and kind of how we take care of the upkeep and things like that. Okay. And let's kind of go into that as well. Like, what are some of the ways that we do manage these areas? Like, what are some of the types of projects or things that we do to kind of keep them at their best for wildlife and waterfowl?
So basically, we're trying to keep that habitat in a certain condition that, for whatever reason, like for me, it's mostly winter range. So we want to keep that habitat as really good winter range.
So have a lot of sagebrush available.
Yeah, we want a lot of shrubs, and we don't want too many juniper trees. So we do a lot of juniper removal to save the water and get rid of those trees that really don't help. They don't help with competition with sagebrush and other shrubs in the understory. So
Gotcha.
we want to keep that habitat in that condition so that it has the most food for deer for wintertime. The other thing we spend a lot of money on is fire rehabilitation. So when you have a fire, like we had in 2018, we lost about a third of the Dairy Fork Wildlife Management Area. And we flew seed and we chained or disturbed the soil so we get our seed to grow better. We spend a lot of money on fire rehabilitation most years. So
that's just when something burns, we're trying to replant it so the deer and elk and things can use it again, essentially.
Exactly. So we're trying to keep that in the best condition we can for those wildlife that are using it, and you give them the most food that we can.
Gotcha.
We actually have in our Utah code a specific outline of management plans. So for every WMA that we manage, we have a habitat management plan for each of those properties. And so we spend years putting those together, deciding what kind of treatments are we going to do, what kind of vegetation are we going to strive for, and put that plan together so we are continuously trying to improve the property.
Gotcha. And it's interesting, and we've kind of touched on this in some of the past episodes where we've talked about different habitat type projects, but just basically trying to make sure we have the best plants there to benefit the most wildlife or for winter or whatever it is, I think is interesting because
Exactly.
some people might just see it and, oh, there's trees and there's grass, so it's good. And we're like, well, no, we need to do a lot of work to like make sure we have the right kind of trees or the right kind of grass or whatever. And you talked about reseeding from, wildfires that we have, but I feel like we also do some like wildfire prevention as well. We do some of those types of projects.
Yes. So one of the things we're kind of managing for is healthy watersheds. So one of the big programs that's come out since 2005 is a watershed restoration initiative. That's where we get a lot of money and a lot of partners come together to plan and do some of these projects to improve our lands and our partners' lands, Forest Service lands, BLM lands, private lands. So we're looking to make healthy watersheds. And a healthy watershed will benefit all the wildlife that use that area. So that's kind of what the focus is now. And fire prevention is a big thing. It's reducing the hazardous fuels, we call it. So taking out some of those conifer trees that have encroached into those shrublands, and reducing the fuel so we don't have as bad of a wildfire if it starts.
Right.
You don't want a catastrophic fire like we've had in the past.
Right. Huge trees that are just going to all like domino and start burning. And,
right.
Yeah. And I'm glad you touched on the Watershed Restoration Initiative program because I am planning to do a future episode about that. So
That would be a really good one.
Everyone get excited about that. It's an awesome program that does so much.
And I'll just touch on the habitat management plans. That's a specific amount of money. We don't get unlimited funds to do projects like that. And so when we have plans in place and when we have ideas of what we are trying to do to improve these properties for wildlife and habitat, when we see issues like vandalism, overcrowding, target shooting, when we have to replace signs or things, that cuts into our budget.
Sure.
You're trying to, mitigate all these other issues that are taking place. That's taking away from the ability to feed more deer.
Totally. Which is what we have these for, like we've talked about. And I'm glad you touched on that as well because, a lot of people think, oh, it's government. They can just do whatever they want and, get more money if they need it. But it is limited. And so we have to sometimes take proactive measures to make sure that we can fund all these things. And in fact, just as an example, this year, because it's, extreme drought, extremely high fire dangers, we did end up having to limit, no campfires, no target shooting with a firearm. And that may have upset some people because they feel like, well, you're restricting what I can do. But it's because of that. If we have tons and tons and tons of fires, we may not have the funding, right, to go and reseed and make these areas good for wildlife again.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've had several fires started by target shooters in the last few years.
Yep.
One property up by Wallsburg, we had a fire the last 3 years, all started from target shooting. So
Wow.
it's amazing how many. Last year, we had 5 different wildfires started by target shooting that burned significant portions of our WMAs.
Right.
It's
And then
a
the
pretty
deer
bad
and-
year.
Yeah. The deer and elk are like, well, where do we go now to survive the winter? And we're like, yeah, good question.
And it's caused a lot of problems with, livestock grazers. Suddenly their allotments in the forest are burned, so they don't have anywhere to go. So there's a lot of people looking for pasture.
Yeah, a lot of ripple effects. And I think it's important to note too, we've talked a lot about what these lands are for, what you can't do there. But I think it's good to point out, we're not saying don't target shoot. We're not saying don't camp.
No.
We're just saying don't do it here. There are tons of other lands for that. In fact, state parks just got 2 new parks this year. There's a ton of BLM land. There's a ton of Forest Service land that are designated for some of these other uses, like you talked, the multi-use areas. So that's kind of what we're saying is just make sure you're aware of what you can do where and kind of respect that.
Exactly. We love recreation, whether that's wildlife and angling related or, riding out on your ATV. It's just there's a time and place for everything. And when you're recreating so hard that you're loving these properties to death, it's having a ripple effect, like you just said.
Yep. Well said.
Well, a lot of people follow the rules and stay on designated roads. It's the small minority that don't that it cause the problems for everybody else.
Sure.
The people that make their own roads and ride wherever they want, create new trails, that's ruining it for others.
Totally.
And that's when, hunters and anglers suffer because they're the ones helping us purchase these lands and maintain these lands. And then they're run out by other, non-traditional recreators.
Sure. And too, to me, the wildlife take the brunt of a lot of it. And it's
Yes.
it's set aside for them specifically. And so it is kind of unfortunate. So you guys obviously work a lot with these different lands and areas. What are kind of some of your favorite experiences, if you guys have a story or something that you've kind of had on a wildlife management area?
Well, I don't have a specific one, but I really enjoy planning a project to improve habitat, whether that's a pinyon juniper removal or a chaining or a bullhog treatment. Having that, plan that and doing it, seeing it come back after it's seeded, it's just really satisfying to see that. And then you drive by years later and it's still there and you can still see that treatment and see it's growing well and there's wildlife using it. It's really satisfying.
That's awesome.
And reseeding fires, that's really satisfying as well.
I was going to say, I've seen some of the before and after pictures. I've never been involved in the actual hands-on work, but the before and after pictures are amazing. Just how much better these areas look after you guys have replanted stuff or removed certain plants, and it is amazing. I love to garden, so I kind of feel like it's large scale, landscape gardening, and I'm like, I can appreciate that. I get it, Remove the weeds and put in some good stuff that'll give you some produce or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Chelsea?
Well, they don't let me out of the office very much, do they? No. I love coming on to those projects too. I mean, just yesterday we were out in the field touring one of the Watershed Restoration Initiative projects and looking at that over the years and to see how that one action, I believe that project was only $10,000, and to see the impact years later and to see what's happened on that landscape and what it's turned into. Those are always really fun experiences to have when we do get a chance to step out of the office. I also really love always going to Hardware Ranch. You can feed some elk and play in the snow, and that's always a really fun time.
Hardware Ranch is cool. I got to go up last year and see some sage grouse doing their little dances, and I did an episode about that. That was really cool. So, we've touched on a lot of different things, but And we've kind of touched on this as well, but what's kind of, I guess, the main thing you want people to take away from this conversation? If you could only say one thing to them, if they remember nothing else from this whole episode, kind of what would your message to them be?
Wildlife management areas are not public recreation areas. That's not their purpose. So the purpose basically of WMAs is what I want people to understand.
Yeah.
They're for wildlife and habitat protection. That's why they're there. So don't ride your bike anywhere you can or drive your four-wheeler anywhere you want. That's what I want people to know.
Okay.
Yeah, along with that, if we continue to use the land the way we've been using it, that habitat value is going to be severely diminished. And so just the next time you are ready to hit your ATV or your bike, think about the way that you're recreating and then decide, is this the most appropriate place for me to be doing that? Because we're not trying to tell you not to recreate. We want you to be mindful of where you choose to do that.
I love it. There's a time and a place. So just know
Yeah.
where you're at and choose the right place. Yep. Go down to the state parks. They're our sister agency. We'll send you over to there if you want to camp and bike ride and stuff. Exactly. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on and kind of educating the public about this important topic. I think, this is very valuable to know, and these areas are so important, like you guys have mentioned. As always, for those of you listening, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the Wild Podcast. We release a new episode each month, so we hope that you'll join us next month for some more wildlife stories.